helps if you have anything would help me if you had something that you wanted to talk about.
Well,
And
let's talk about thought adjuster. The concept of what it is for people who don't know. Then you're at your book,
I was really, when I first started reading the book, I was really nonplussed about the name. It seemed like a clumsy thing to say. But that's really what the thought adjuster does. He, as I understand it, early in the development of the individual, the thought adjuster is new to the person. And so there's a period of time when the thought adjuster is sort of, as I picture it, watching the person he is attached to, learning what they're like, and sort of taking it all in. So there's the thought adjuster, I don't think is as active initially as he becomes later, of course, when he finally becomes acquainted with his charge, the human being that he's attached to. And I think that what he is doing is learning where the person is that he's attached to, what they're like, and how he can eventually become actually a part of that person's being. So but it depends on the thought adjuster in a way too, because there are so-called virgin thought adjusters who've never been attached to anyone, and there are thought adjusters that have been, sometimes to many people, who haven't failed to survive, and are, of course, their existence is terminated. And then, of course, in that case, all the experiences the thought adjuster has acquired over that period of time when the individual is still around, all those things he's kept. And of course, when the person is gone, those quality experiences of anything of spiritual value are kept by the thought adjuster, and he becomes a thought adjuster that's experienced. And they say that the personalized thought adjuster that Jesus had lived a great number of lives. When a lot of people who didn't survive, he was acquainted with, and so he had quite a background of understanding. And then, of course, when he was Jesus' thought adjuster, and Jesus didn't survive as a human being, all that went to him, to that personalized thought adjuster. And I believe there was a time when Jesus actually had him represent him. I've forgotten the details of that, So, but he really does work with people, trying to introduce them to God's Spirit. It's not a matter of, I don't think so much as understanding, but it's a matter of the spirit development, so that the thought adjuster doesn't actually get in so much in the sense that get into the individual's life, in the sense that he guides him around, or so much, at least at the beginning, in his worldly experiences. I think that help is usually help. He's a thought adjuster. He's a spirit being. He's a spirit entity that's eventually, when the individual becomes fused with him, he's really a spirit. And so I think he deals pretty much entirely with spirit matters, and tries to develop the spirituality of the individual. I've thought more and more about the most important aspects for us as human beings in our circumstance, where most of us have no idea what the thought gesture is all about. What is the most important aspects of what we learn and develop in our experiences? And there's, to me, it's that the most startling thing is that never occurred to me before, as a person who has gone through the religious understandings of this day and generation, to a certain extent anyway, is the fact that Jesus did not display a complete picture of who God is when he was here. You know, he was concerned with God's spirit, which is the dominant aspect of God. His spirit is the I am, and that was what Jesus taught. Jesus started at the beginning. He didn't present the whole picture because he didn't present the activity, the normal, let's say normal, spirit activity of God. That is his being, what he did in his spirit manner. And that, so God really has a nature and a being. His nature is spirit, but his being is how he creates and functions. And Jesus didn't, to my understanding, never talked much about that. You know? Have you run into that before?
No, I agree. I'm with you. But I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, it's so there's really two aspects to God, and one of them we're not really familiar with. And of course that left a vacuum in the minds of the early Hebrews or peoples of that day, and the ones that followed. They don't know what he did either. There was nothing to indicate that. So that's really an aspect that's entirely new, I think, to people. I mean, we talked about him. The only action that I think we got from his time on this planet and what's left of the understanding of it is that comes through his activity of spirit as the I am. And that, of course, was not well understood, I don't think, after his time. And I think that not failure, but his activity that ended without broaching that subject is one of the things which has really confused human beings.
But what do we know now?
Well, that's a heavy subject. It's Jesus and God is pictured, in my mind at least, as a being who, first of all, is spirit, and that's an important point. God is first spirit, and then out of that spirit he acts. So the action comes from the spirit, and we don't distinguish those things too well. Of course, we didn't before the Urantia book, there was practically no indication about how they were involved. But God has other aspects to it that are not associated with his spirit. He is a person that acts. The spirit attaches the meaning and value to our actions, is the way it seems to me. That's where, and that's the essence of God, and that's the essence that informs his actions. So that as the I am, all the actions he takes are consistent with the I am. And I think those are, they limit his actions. In fact, when God functions, he has total freedom to do as he chooses. But the I am acts as a limit to his actions. So he can't, well, I guess I should say something about my understanding, the origin of my understanding of what God does. He does what he wants to do in a sense, but he has that freedom. But he only has total freedom to do what he wants when he's acting in a way that does not involve the I am. And I thought about the opening verses of Genesis a number of times. And the first thing that Genesis says God did, he said, it talks first, as I remember, at least in one of those creation stories, about in the beginning there was a void, and then God created the physical universe out of that void. And we know the void, and we know that the physical universe is a time and space finite reality. That's the nature of it. There's two parts of reality that God created, and that is the finite reality, and then there's the absonite reality, which is infinite, the infinite reality. And so we know they exist in space. And so it seems that if it started as a void, I take that to mean something that's not even space. The Urantia book indicates that space is something. It's not the nothingness that I learned when I was in school. That it's an emptiness. It's the void. The space has qualities, and so it seems then that the void is pretty much a term for the emptiness, or I think of it as not space. I don't know what to call it, but it's not space. And then in not space, God first acted to create space, if we think of him as doing things in a sequence, which is not real anyway, but that's the only way we can understand it.
We see it, yeah.
Yeah, because we deal with sequence all the time. It's the only way we can live is through sequences. And so if he did it in things in sequence, the first thing would be the creation of space, and the next thing would be the creation of the I would say the cosmos, for lack of another term. So he creates in space, and that requires that he function out of his own I am in space. But if we think about it, the I am only applies to places where spirit is part of the action. And when God creates and spirit is not involved, he creates without the I am, and he created space that way because he must have created space that way because space was created long before human beings were. So the limitation on his creation occurred before life appeared in finite reality. And so he functioned purely without reference to the I am in the opening stages of creation. And in those stages he was nothing more, I shouldn't say nothing more, but he was limited. Because he was not taking part. Well, that's not a way to explain it. But he wasn't involved with the I am. The I am was not involved. And so in these, he was able to create in a way that did not involve him as the I am in the action. In other words, God does not create out of himself as the I am unless some spirit being or some spirit entity is involved in that creation. Then the I am kicks in. So spirit creation is the kind of creation that involves his being as spirit, as the I am. But he can also create without that involvement. And the only time, that means there's two kinds of experiences he has. He has the experience that does not involve the I am, and then the experience that does. And the I am then functions whenever he starts to add, well, no, I shouldn't say that. His experience then, when he is not functioning as the I am, is the experience of an observer. That's the only thing he can do, is observe. He can't physically, or well, spiritually take part in anything that's not, in essence, spirit. And this accounts for his type of experience. And he started functioning as the I am when he started creating creatures in terms of spirit.
Okay, so I'm going to stop and see how things are
Yeah.
going. I don't know how the sound is